Hi everyone, my name is Sophie, and today I would like to share with you some of the mental challenges specifically for high achievers. This is a topic that I am very passionate about. If you haven't already heard me say this in my videos, my passion is to try my best to help people who help people. So this is especially dedicated to those who are in the helping professions, whether you're in the healthcare field or work in education or even have a small business or work for a corporation. If you're dedicated to a certain population or just improving the quality of life for other people, this may particularly resonate with you. All right, let's get into it. So the first mental challenge is good idea overload. Now, if you're someone who is a high achiever, meaning you often want to go above and beyond, you want to achieve things, you want to do a good job, you want to get those accolades, and this is coming from both an internal sense of motivation that you probably have had since childhood, and also the external validation and the relationship between you and the outside world and what you produce. So when you have this kind of disposition, you're going to have a lot of ideas. You're probably very bright. You probably think about these ideas all the time. You may be doing this in isolation. When you have so many ideas and you could go in so many different directions and you see so many problems and opportunities, in a way, this can clog the system so that there's actually a paralysis that happens. And the other point to this is as you think about all these ideas, you can, in a way, get caught in fantasy, which can feel really good because you're thinking about all of the potential. And it can also sometimes give you a false sense of working on things. So you have all these ideas, you may have a really strong specific vision, and this can actually be overwhelming to other people. So it may seem like people aren't excited or wanting to get on board with what you have to say. And sometimes that's because you're outlining something that might be something that could take a lot of time or require a lot of pieces. And so to the outsider, especially people that may be working with you or working for you, they're thinking, how is this all going to get done? What am I supposed to do here? So that's something that can be kind of an overload and can also lead to feelings of alienation and isolation. If you're highly talented and you're a high achiever, you probably have a lot of opportunities. You probably talk to people about your ideas, and rather than getting overwhelmed, a lot of people might be really inspired and really excited. And so when businesses and organizations and people come across people like you, they're going to want to give opportunities because they're going to want you and what you can offer. So this can also be an overload. You know, if I go to this place or I work with this person, it could lead to this. It could be such an amazing opportunity. And so that can be kind of confusing and also paralyzing. If you believe that you can do it best because it may be your idea or you've spent so many times, going over it and thinking about it, that when you are in a position where you're working on something, it's hard to pull away. And this is related to it being hard to or not being able to say no. Now, this is a whole other presentation on boundaries and how to navigate that. But if you're thinking that you're going to be able to do it properly, to do it in the best way, to have the most success, that becomes a barrier in being able to let go of something so that you're actually able to start working on your ideas. Another one that I've definitely experienced before, as well as the first one, and this is the self-defeating timeline. Now, a lot of the time, if you have that motivation and vision, and I see this time and time again, I would say 100% of the grad students that I work with and the folks that are doing these large scale projects are actually seeing something that appears to be a shorter term project or vision that's actually something that should be stretched out over a much longer timeline in terms of what's actually feasible. And this creates a really interesting mind shift that you have to make, because as you start to adjust the timeline to something that's feasible, especially if you're relying on other people, a research project, you're relying on people to take the survey, some kind of community program, you're relying on approvals or getting funding or any number of things. So you'll have this project and it's basically too much to be able to do, which again, that's going to feel really weird. If you have too many to-dos, if you have this big project and you have this long to-do list, and one of the things is going to take the whole day, if it's a daily to-do list, or one of the things is actually broken down into 10 things, that can be overloading. And if you've ever had this pattern where you have all these things on your to-do list and it's just the same list every day, every week, it's happened to me for years in a row, where there are just too many things to do and it's hard to know where to start. So all of this leads to a lowered sense of achievement. It affects your professional self-esteem. And it all comes back to not breaking things down into truly bite-sized pieces, to take something that you might think is going to take a year and to just, as a thought experiment, think about it being stretched out over a 10-year period. Just imagine what that would look like and be able to start small and really break it down. If you break it down into things that seem like they're going to take 5 minutes, and you're actually then starting to do that thing, it's likely going to take more than 5 minutes. And when you're starting with something small like that, if you're one of those people that will get in the zone once you start, and maybe it's actually really hard to stop, and that's another issue, then that's a way to get started on things. I can't stress this enough. Having great ideas, even having a solid plan, if it's not broken up into really small pieces that are truly attainable one day at a time, something for that day, it can be really tough for these folks that have a lot of energy, maybe like you and me, that are really mentally taking on something much bigger, and it can be difficult to start. And you may be thinking there are other types of issues and patterns and mental health conditions and differing abilities and learning styles and all of that whole spectrum that can come into play. These are kind of general things that are very common. There can be then a dissatisfaction with working on something that's smaller. So you take this larger project and you take the first phase of it, if you outline it in 10 phases, for an example. And if you think, well, you're going to shrink it down to just the first phase, knowing this could take just as long as you figured the 10 phases would be. And that might feel like you're not doing enough. It might feel like a project that's too small. It might feel like a prototype or some type of product testing or whatever it may be, designing a course, anything. Things tend to take longer, and that's not to say that you can't do things really efficiently. That's another thing that has kind of a dark side, because if you can do things efficiently and get things done quick, You might also not feel like you're working hard enough or doing enough. So being able to practice and start to get comfortable with changing the scope to something that seems a lot smaller is actually going to potentially help get things started, build that sense of achievement. And ultimately, this is about protecting your well being and reducing burnout. And this is just kind of the first set of challenges to start thinking about. And this is not true for every single person. It may or may not resonate, but thought experiment, shrinking things down, very good skill to have. And then this idea of invisible skills, working with so many clearly high achieving students and professionals and friends, peer mentors, there is oftentimes this sense of if something is easy, if it doesn't take a lot of time, if it doesn't take a lot of effort, if it's something that seems like it's natural, it can be invisible as a skill and it can be looked at as something that's not a talent. And this kind of comes into play and is illuminated when you might get into the job market, possibly for the first time, or if you're doing a career switch and you're thinking of, let's say, the hard skills that you have from your job or your experience, and you might not see that, if you look at something like communication and, of course you can write professional emails and you can craft reports. It's just writing things down. Or of course you can talk to people. It's just talking to people. It's just explaining ideas. And, maybe you have that extroverted personality, or maybe you are more of an introvert and you are thoughtful and you are more in the observing mode oftentimes. The things that can come naturally, or the things that you could do very quickly, those things can sometimes not seem like skills because you don't have that energy of working really hard to acquire it. Even though if you look back at your life or your career, you will find that these easy skills or these things that come naturally, you have been practicing those and using those the entire time. So you're dedicating a ton of time to doing that. Natural skills can seem like they're not achievements, but they are. You're using all of those. Anything that you learn in life, you are using them, and you can use them and you will use them in every project, job, initiative, anything that you end up doing. So this other piece to this is thinking that more skills is better. Now, this sounds like, of course, that would be true. You have more tools in your toolbox, you're going to be more attractive on the job market and all of that. The downside to the thought process behind this, not necessarily the learning new skills. Of course, there are so many benefits to doing that, but it's the thought pattern of thinking that your skill set is not enough, and to do this other thing, you're going to need to learn all of these things. And that can be very attractive to glom onto in a way that supports this core belief that you need to work harder, achieve more. And the dark side to that is that all of that energy and efforting can sort of obscure this other skill set that you already have that's ready to go. And it can be a mental drain. And you're expending this energy, which means there's less energy to potentially take steps forward. Now, this may sound kind of strange, but keep in mind, we're talking about this thought process. And if you can relate to this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's a good practice to think about what are the things that you even do in your day to day, and thinking about how those are skills. Because the part of this that is tied to some other things that I'll talk about working in isolation versus envisioning yourself as part of a team, whether or not you have a team, is that there are other people out there in the world that have some of these skills. So sometimes there's a framework that in order to do this project that requires all these different skills, you're going to need to learn them and be an expert in that. And so this is really about protecting your energy and being able to use and see the skills that you have, because that's going to affect your professional and personal self-esteem. Last part of this is perfectionism, which can lead to delayed trying. So if you do have a skill and there is something that you want to try, that perfectionism, that wanting to be better, that kind of imaginary benchmark where you have more of this skill or you're at a higher level, and then you will attempt this, that is perfectionism. Most of us understand what that is and how it feels. And it's not that you're trying to make things perfect or you're going to make things perfect or that's what you expect. Perfectionism is really the feeling like you are not good enough, really, when it comes down to it. Making mistakes, having things that aren't your idea of perfect. It's really a mental state. If you think about it as an ism, or even as an illness, let's say, or a condition, where there's just that lack of satisfaction. And if that's affecting your self-concept, that's slowing it all down. Believe me, I've had plenty of things where I have this idea, I totally want to do it, and there's just this block. And being able to work on that self-worth and really decoupling the product from the person to be able to just start. After you start, continuous practice without even trying, you're doing the work, but you're naturally going to evolve. But all of this really has to do with building up your internal self-worth, which is a story for another day. All of this, to me, fits into the same category of psychic drain. Now, I don't know if this is a thing. I don't know if I made this up. I don't know if this verbiage makes sense, but it does to me. And I talk about it a lot because, again, this is something that I've seen in everyone that I've come into contact with that has a big idea, that has a vision, that is taking on something that is a big goal, going to graduate school, starting a business. It's this energy that it takes to take on mentally these things, like having all the ideas, thinking about the opportunities, thinking about the different directions you could go in, thinking about the additional skills that you would need, thinking about all the things that you have to do, things that take a long time that you can't do in an overnighter. You have to be able to break it down. You have to be able to be okay with not doing it. And so the psychic drain of having it all in your head, this is very different than having a lot that you absolutely have to do. You're working 80 hours a week. You have, responsibilities. You have your workload, all the things that are out of your control. Those are on the physical level. But right here, right now, we're talking about the mental level. We're just talking about the headspace that is taken up by all of these different kind of challenges. So it is a lifelong practice to be able to cut things down to a small, feasible, attainable thing and keep all that other stuff out of your mind. Understanding that we're part of a whole, that has helped me a lot. Not feeling like I have to just create something out of nothing, that I'm doing something over here. A lot of times I don't know where it's going or even, what it is part of, but we are all part of a whole. We are all doing a small part. And if you're passionate about something, you want that to spread, presumably. So it doesn't matter how small your part seems, because once you find that outlet that's appropriate for you to plug into, once you're breaking it down so small that you're able to actually achieve those things, and once you sort of start the journey of protecting your well-being, which is what ultimately catches up to you if you have an imbalance in the energy that you're putting into these things. You're not going to have that sustainable progress and be able to protect your headspace and protect your mental health. It all gets done. We cannot control the timeline. We can't control the timeline. We can try, but there are variables that are beyond our control. In our society, we have a lot of these constructs where we want to do stuff by 30, we want to do stuff by 40. We should be here, we should be doing this. And even, at work, when we should be promoted, all of that kind of stuff, we're internalizing that. And that can cause a real psychic drain, and it can be a real bummer, and it can affect your self-esteem, and it can affect your productivity and all the rest. So being able to practice undoing yourself from being tied to those kinds of expectations that we automatically internalize, super, super helpful. And a final thing that has helped me a lot, if you are one of those people that you want to have a broad impact, you want to be able to help as many people as possible, or it's an ego-driven thing where you want something to be super successful, being able to trust that if you are able to help one person, even if that is you, they're going to be a better friend, partner, workplace, work partner, or colleague. They might have the ability to then start something that helps people sustain their own well-being. If you think about how many people that we actually affect, when you think about it in that kind of butterfly effect, we've all impacted thousands, if not millions of people. It is all connected. So I will close by saying that these mental challenges, they are very common in high achievers. They're not common in everyone. And they are also found in people that may not identify as a high achiever at all. But we're talking about the mental space that some of these things take up that can prevent you from really enjoying your well-being and enjoying working towards your goals, no matter how many things are out of your control, really zeroing in on the things that are.